Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. My guest today is Dr. Hillard Pouncy, an old friend who, when he isn't advocating for social impact programs, writing, speaking, is researching issues that are plaguing particularly urban centers around the country. And at the top of that list is violence, senseless killing of young people particularly, children, teenagers, who are taken down every night. Check the news every single night, and there's a story about another person, an innocent person, who was hit by a stray bullet, if not an intentional bullet. Following the news is another clip of family, neighbors, friends lamenting the fact that the streets have been turned over to gangs, to mobsters, and wringing their hands about what the solution is to make their streets safe again. That's the subject of my visit today with Dr. Pouncy. Hillard, it's always good to see you.
Rick, it's a great pleasure on my part as well.
And I know this topic is of special interest to you. You've done research in it and so on. It seems to me particularly timely. Yesterday, I think it was, broad daylight in Manhattan, somebody accosted a woman, a stranger, threw her to the ground. She knocked her head against the hard pavement and died. Senseless. It makes no sense at all. 15, 20 rounds of bullets being shot off in a neighborhood in any part of the city. What surprises me, though, is in this morning's paper, I watched the news last night, there were shootings again, as there always are. But in this morning's paper, there was no coverage. And I got to wondering, maybe there is a conspiracy here. I am a conspiracy theorist, as you know, that the news media doesn't want to cover it now because it's giving the city a bad name. Not that the city doesn't deserve it, but it's giving the city a bad name. Anyway, that's a whole other issue to get into in communications, which I know is another one of your specialties. So my question to you is there a solution? If not, what do we do? The streets are turning into the wild, wild west.
Thanks, Rick. And usually when we do the show, we find something about it to have a good laugh with, including our own inner dynamics. This one's not that show, right? This is a fairly serious topic, and I don't think we need to hype it, as they say. So here's what I think, and versus what we should know. This is a show where I've done no prep with a quick review of any data. So I'm just relying on memory of things I've done and memory of things, more importantly, others have done. So let's set that stage.
All right.
So independent of anecdotal accounts of murder and mayhem on the streets, characterized by wild and other adjectives like that, my understanding is homicide rates, murder in our country in the aggregate, not making it just about urban areas, is actually less than it had been in, say, the 80s. But there was a famous study by Bruce Western, I think he's at Columbia now, and the point of his research, very careful research, was that although in the aggregate homicide rates are no longer as high as they used to be, they have been increasing of late. So in the short term, there is a rise in particularly murder in urban areas as well. But what struck Western at the time was that even when murder rates were declining, the effort to fight crime was increasing as measured by incarceration rates, something like that, which was a telling and compelling story. So
a correlation you would expect, though.
No. Follow me. As murder rates are going down.
I'm sorry,
right,
I misunderstood.
Right.
I got it.
Politicians were inflamed about it and getting good reputations by showing they were going to be tough on crime. And so that was then. That was an interesting story then. The question is, what's going on now? And the parts of it that I want to highlight go something like this. So in the political arena now, there's a prominent group called Black Lives Matter, and the brilliant group, by the way. And the logic of their movement is that shouldn't it matter that people are being mistreated, murdered particularly? But the issue is who's murdering whom? And if someone's being murdered by a public official, police departments especially, this is the front and center. This is where the group wants to focus on. Mm-hmm. And it's an obvious problem because, so if Black lives actually matter, why should it matter who kills a Black person? Shouldn't it matter equally if another Black person kills a Black person, or anybody kills anybody, obviously, right. But we'll play by the rules established by this important public policy initiative and just worry about who's killing Black people. And if you do that, and you do it the way you would assume people would want to do it, you would say, it's as important that police are killing Black people. That's a big problem because it's perceived as with impunity, and and they were right about that. You really do want to have people held accountable, but it should be equally important to hold people accountable if they're also murdering anybody. But let's keep it, for the purpose of the show, on the color of the victim, Black people, and so anybody who kills a Black person should be held accountable, and that is often, as you noted, other young people. I don't know numbers, so I'm just going to be using reputations, maybe unfairly. But it does seem that gang violence accounts for an amount of urban violence that you'd want to worry about, and so that's where we are. So now we're on the hot spot, as it were, at least for your show. What about the urban violence caused by gangs, Hillard? Which
wait, you just made a leap, but you went from Black Lives Matter, which you characterized as a brilliant organization.
Yes, I did. Right.
With which I don't agree.
Well, that's the point of the show, Rick.
No, we're not going to go there.
Okay.
That's a whole other show.
The maturity impresses me.
Oh, absolutely. I've done my homework too. But okay, we went from that to gangs in the streets.
Yes. Okay, let's do it again. Okay, we can do it again. No, I appreciate that because you can, if you're close to something, you can easily make assumptions and leaps that may not make sense. So what I was trying to do in a serious way, I'll now just do it in a cartoon way. For
my benefit, of course.
I didn't say that. So yes, the logic had been that we should be concerned by the instructions of Black Lives Matter for the violence against Black youth, Black people in general, right?
Yes.
Right.
Parenthetically by whites.
Let's not inflame. It's
that's what Black Lives Matter is all about.
I think I said by police. They were worried about victimization by police, especially because they felt police.
Whether the police were Black or white.
Yes, that's correct. And with impunity was what they were really
allegedly. Yes.
And that is important. Let's not dismiss that. That's why I call them important. But in a brilliant group for being able to bring attention, because that too had been an intractable problem. But the thing that I think they miss, or that makes them vulnerable to cartooning, is that if you really believe that Black Lives Matter, then anybody who kills any death, any murders of Black people should matter as well, and that's where you get to the conversation we're talking about now, because you're saying, oh, so we're going to give gangs and other sources of Black violence or any other source of Black death in the Black community a pass, and the short answer is no, we shouldn't. We should talk about that as well. So that's what you want to talk about on the show, and that's what I'm here to talk about. So shall we begin?
Yes.
Okay. So treat all of that.
That's the preamble.
Yes, that's the word I was using as well. And so now let's get serious about just that point.
Right.
Just that point. And I was telling my wife this morning, I am just excited to be on your show today because this is a conversation that I'd been having alone because of COVID in the shower. Yeah. What about all this? So before COVID started, I had been party to not my research, which is sacred. That's the good stuff. But just teaching exercises, policy making exercises around just this problem. Mm-hmm. What should we do with violence? How should we treat violence, urban violence? And these are all code words for murdering. When youth murder each other. From West Side Story to today, what do we do about this? And the answer had been before COVID, at least in the rooms I had some control over, we should think about work by, I think his first name is Donald. I could have it wrong, but his last name's Kennedy, and it's just my problem, my gray hair, because I know him. I consider him a friend.
You've referenced him before, as I recall.
Yes, that's right. In fact, Kennedy had this idea for dealing with violence in general. He wasn't worried about who the colored people getting murdered, by saying that youth violence is predictable and treatable. And his argument was that if young people can calculate that there's a consequence to murdering people, they won't do it. Sort of like if the police think there's a consequence, they won't misbehave either. So it's interesting thought experiment. And so his argument was that what you could do is you could treat gangs the way to a certain kind of intelligence operation, and you could figure out who were the leaders, because they're the real problem, and who were the followers, because they were vulnerable. And it was a brilliant idea. You'd get the weaker members of the gang, bring the forces of civic and official sanctions against them, and get them to leave the gang, leaving the leaders isolated, high and dry, and treatable, and treatable by primarily criminal sanctions. Something like that? Am I getting through?
How do you do that?
Well,
particularly if you now interject the whole issue of drugs, and the leaders are drug lords.
It wouldn't matter. The point would be, okay. I'm actually trying to just get. I'm just trying to set the table because there's real interesting stuff going on.
Okay.
The theory, in brief form, was that people who want to kill other people are rare, which is the good news. And whether you're in the inner city, in the army, any other location, murderers are relatively rare. And I didn't mean, my father's in the military, so I didn't mean to collapse.
Is the operative word want to kill?
I'm not sure. I'm not going to go where my understanding is empirically, in any group, the people who do murdering, and we're not going to interrogate what their motive, whether they like it or want to do it, is relatively rare. So in the inner city, just as an example, the youngsters who actually do murder are few, but the numbers who are in a gang are relatively large.
Yes.
So Kennedy's insight had been that there were some people in a gang who were actually dangerous. They were murdering, but there were other people in a gang who were relatively speaking, not dangerous because they weren't murderers. They were in the gang for safety, attachment, who knows what. I'm being fairly loose-minded here. So, but that gave him an insight that if you talked to members of a gang who were not the leaders, who were not doing the murdering, and you said, look, we could do this the easy way, we could do it the hard way. If you leave the gang and or give us information, you can imagine what they were doing. We will make it easy for you to leave the gang. We'll get you a job, stuff like that. That's the pitch. But if you don't leave the gang, then what we can do is we can use whatever we can against you. You don't live by yourself, you live with your grandmother, let's say, and she's behind on her utility bills. She will be made to suffer for your activities. It's a very hard deed that they were suggesting, but they were willing to do it. And this happened, my understanding is Kennedy implemented this in Boston at one point, which had a very low crime rate for a short period of time. I encountered it in Trenton. Philadelphia, my understanding is, thought about it for a while. I don't think they ever implemented it, or they may be thinking about it again. Chester's now trying to implement it. But more interestingly, this became internationally interesting to our friends in Central America, where they had very bad gang problems. And in a class I was fortunate to host at Princeton twice, we were looking at gang problems in Central America under the somewhat problematic assumption that what works here could work anywhere. Yes. Let's export our public policy. And my understanding is that Kennedy had helped leaders in Central America, two countries I know of anyway, Honduras and Costa Rica, think this through. And then we were able to follow up and go visit and learn a little bit. And I was genuinely surprised at what we found out later. Not while we were there, but later. So the problem with that intervention goes like this. Once you make the outcome of the public policy amount of murder, what we're doing on this show today, you actually create a problem that you may not have anticipated, because people who are in gangs are pretty smart too. And once they found out that murdering was a problem that a public official was living or dying by, they would say, you know, I'd hate to see the murder rate go up in this town. You see what I'm saying? And I know you think I'm clowning, as they say, but it's a true thing. And so the vulnerability of that policy is, until it's really succeeds, it's extremely vulnerable, because you've made murder of all things a public good. And you can either increase it or decrease it. You can regulate it, as it were. What the gangs were doing is, in order to join a gang, they would assign the newest member the task of murdering someone, and they would go shoot somebody who was homeless. Completely, they weren't shooting each other; they were shooting. So it's not this. These stereotypes sometimes can help us not see too well. So they could call it off, or they could increase it. They could regulate it.
I would think, however, that the policymakers, the law enforcers, would risk a serious backlash. If I went and I said, if you don't get in line, if you don't stop what you're doing, if you don't let us help you, we're going to make it miserable for your grandmother, the word gets out.
Oh yeah,
those SOBs are going to make life miserable for that 75-year-old woman.
Yeah, no, that's
because of that stupid kid she's
Yeah, exactly. No, I don't know which way.
That makes the good guys look bad.
That would be a problem.
It would be a problem.
Yeah. Did I mention that would be a problem too? Yeah. No. I think
what you haven't mentioned, and I could be really dead wrong on this one, is the cultural changes that we've been experiencing over the past 3 years.
Well, Rick,
as evidence of all the violence in
Rick,
the streets.
I'm going to interrupt you here.
And the fact that life is cheap these days.
Rick, look, before you jump into a rabbit hole, which you would like to do, that's who you are, I just want to make sure we reinforce something here. The idea we wanted to look at very carefully were responses to a public policy, this issue of violence, urban violence, and then you can color it if you like. And the idea was that there was a dominant view of it, not dominant, there was a view of, with some evidence of it working on the table.
Yes. And
in careful examination, it turns out that there's some problems with that public policy. So that doesn't look like it's a long-term, even a short-term solution. But at least in our discussion, we can now think about what to do, and we can say yes or no on that one. But at least we are doing it on an informed basis. Okay.
Right.
So let's not just dismiss that and go running off to some vague, unstated argument about culture for openers. I would suggest that.
You're not disassociating culture from the problem.
I am saying I took the charge of this show seriously, and we looked at an actual public policy the way a trained person that we are both would want to do. And that's, and rather than just say, oh, okay, let's.
No, I'm not dismissing.
Right. But I wanted to make sure, because I noticed it. I said, wait a second, we just spent a lot of time working out what the pros and cons of this thing were. As soon as we got some kind of clarity, Rick wanted to jump over and talk about culture, which in the world I live in can be a loaded term. Okay? So before we do that, I would like to follow up on what had been careful work, if you don't mind.
By all means.
I'm just pausing because this is a moment of clarity for me in the show. So when I was thinking about what to do as a consequence of knowing that there were some strengths and weaknesses to an idea, the way I would have gone would not have been, well, what about the culture, Hillard? I would have gone a different way. I would have, and this will be a surprise to you, I would have gone to the movie Trading Places. You remember that one?
Yes.
At one point, these two characters, Don Amici and the other guy, I'll code it, two old white guys, are almost dryly constructing the application of some cliches about why are those people acting like that, being poor and acting like that. And one theory was, well, it's their culture, their nature. And the other is opportunities, nurture. Right. And so we'll just run a little experiment, and we'll take one of our kids, white kid, Dan Aykroyd, and make him poor, take everything away from him. And we'll take a homeless throwaway guy, played by Eddie Murphy, black in this case, and we'll hire him. And then we'll run our experiment, which, by the way, is called a natural experiment, which won a Nobel Prize in today's headlines, doing natural experiments. And that's what the movie is about. And so part of me brings that up because when I'm in arenas where people want to do the culture game, we'll call it, I'm of the mind that, the problem I have with that game is it says, let's be the Don Amici other character and with erudition discuss whether it's culture or opportunity, as if we were running an experiment. And I'm going to suggest that at least when I want to talk about this, I'm going to do it a different way. And then we can look at it and we can say, well, I want to do it my way. Okay.
I rescind the word culture.
Okay, but I'm on a roll. So I'd like to finish.
But I will be back.
Well, good for you. Okay, but I want before I'm doing it because I can't hold a thought for very long. So I'd like to keep it together.
Go right ahead.
Yeah. So when I was thinking about then what are the other options? Like what appeals to me? It goes like this. So when I was being trained, the idea was, look, it really is up to the people involved to take hold over their situation and deal with it. Mm-hmm. So in the great history of this country, group after group have been faced with adversity and been stigmatized by their lack of virtue. The Irish are so pick whatever they were supposed to be. The Italians they're all in gangs and so forth. And you know, what's happening with Black Americans in the press is no different than what's common in our country.
The stereo.
Yeah, you know, the groups, the behavior of a non-respected group, mm-hmm. that kind of thing. But the real action for this kind of for the solution is not what Don Amici and outsiders are putting together as a narrative. It's what happens from the group from within. And the real secret of this country, and it's one of the virtues of this country, I might note, is that somehow, willy-nilly, groups, if they can take their destiny into their own hands. And that usually happens when about a third of the group, and the experiment is your group shows up in this country through immigration, forced or otherwise. And so you're all basically poor, all of y'all. What a way to run a country, right? We don't have aristocracies. The poorest guys everywhere, show up, come on, all of you, get in the boat, here we go. And when you're here, now the fun begins. And there's no differentiation. You're all poor, which makes you all very vulnerable. All you've got are your numbers, so you could vote if we let you. But you're not going to have any people from your own group running because you can't read and all that stuff. So the miracle of the country is that doing this willy-nilly, most groups get about a third of their group middle class within a generation or two. How they get the money, I don't know. But the magic of that is once your group has a cohort that are middle class, what that's code for is you now have your people who can run the system, make a business, run for government, do things. And in doing that, they can establish within group capacity for self-sustaining growth and improvement. And that's the secret of our country. So that cliche, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. What that really is actually just a comment on, why can't you do the thing that you're supposed to do? So now, bring it up to date with African Americans, which is where it gets real interesting real fast. Most other groups didn't have something in the Constitution that said, y'all ain't really citizens. You're only 2/3 of a citizen. We have to do some work to get you right, with these amendments and stuff. And even then, you've been under serious oppression, but we don't burn down your town whenever you make a little progress, like in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it turns out lynching might be an issue for some. So under those impediments, even then, about a third of African Americans became middle class around in the 1950s. Took a few years, a few decades, but they did. And that's when you start to see these things: voting rights, civil rights, social movements outside of the electoral arena, some gains within the electoral arena. Now, the connection between all of that and this violence problem goes like this. I think the real secret to what we are facing now will have to come from inside the Black community. And the ability, the capacity for doing it is there. We have the people. We have Cory Booker, all these guys. But the old ways that you could translate your civic elites into actions that get the group out of and could sustain poverty and now trauma would be government. Well, the reason you want your group to control government is in the old days, government meant jobs, patronage, and all that. Well, we don't do that anymore. You can have the city hall, but it doesn't do very much. You can become president, but it doesn't mean the same thing. So that route doesn't seem to be as effective. The other way you do it is you would, with your ability to operate, you'd run businesses, and your group would hire its own and get rich and go out that way. And that's been interesting. I don't know the numbers of late, but middle class African Americans typically are school teachers, not entrepreneurs, although athletes are now starting to get a little bit, little interesting thing there. So I suspect the way things will shake out is in the South, where there are enough Black people in strength, will become the location for the great turnaround. But it's going to be pretty amazing because the South is the headquarters of, the great reaction. Yeah. And so I know we're running out of time, so I'll leave it there.
1 minute.
Well, I'm not going to try and wrap it up in 1 minute. I think we'll just have to do this again.
I think we should, because I haven't had a chance to.
I know. It's just been amazing for me.
I bit my tongue and lip and whatever else I had to do to give you the time. But I understood that you needed the time to develop.
I wanted to actually take your ideas seriously, and I can't wait to hear how you're going to.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you on the solution having to come from within. I think everybody would agree to that.
No, not everybody, but go ahead.
Most reasonable people would agree to that. People have been saying it for a long time. It's up to the Blacks to solve their problem. Anyway, we are running out of time, and I'm so sorry. But if you promise to come back, we'll pick it up.
Yes, no, this has been exciting for me, and
Okay.
I haven't had a chance to think about stuff like this in a while, and I am curious to see how you'll mangle all this great work I've done, but we'll see.
This has been 30 Minutes. I am Rick Anthony. My guest today has been Dr. Hillard Pouncy. Until next time, take very good care of yourselves.